So Prakash, you can go ahead and start on up to the stage here. Get yourselves positioned. Is everybody mic'd up? All right, so after this panel, we'll have a 15-minute break. So let me remind you that if you haven't had a chance to visit the sponsor tables, please take advantage of that during the break. And once again, we need to thank our sponsors for their support in making this happen.
Seconds.
Huh?
Who's second? Who's first?
I'm third.
Yeah, you're first.
So now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our next panel moderator. Dr. Prakash Srivastava is a principal consultant at the Business and Platform Solutions Division of Atos Group in North America. His current areas of interest are data science, predictive maintenance, digital transformation of the supply chain, and modeling and simulation of business systems and processes. And in his spare time, he serves as an adjunct faculty member at the Jindal School of Management at the University of Texas at Dallas. So Prakash, you have the floor to introduce your panel and your panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. So today we covered quite a lot of ground already. First of all, Tom, Bev, Michael, I'd like to thank you to give an opportunity for us to be here. And the topic of this discussion today is simulation, OT, IoT, technology applications. In the morning, we heard about tools like ANSYS and MathWorks and their capabilities that those tools have in designing digital twins, doing control systems. We also heard a panel discussion on the smart cities. And now, building on that background, we come to talk about technology applications.
Forgot about rain.
So it's all interconnected. OT means sensors, relays, controllers, SCADA systems. IT means enterprise asset management, manufacturing execution systems, and all of that, and all those to be integrated. So there are a lot of applications, as Bill was pointing out, could come out of this. To help lead that discussion today, we have a very distinguished panel here with us. So on the topic of simulation applications, we have Charles. We'll introduce in a minute. On the topic of IoT, we have Stan, the next. And on the last topic of applications, so we have Matt, who will talk about power generation industry, how all these things are applied. So to begin, before I give the floor to panelists, I've been thinking about all that we learned today is also connected in some sense. So I've been drawing a diagram of sorts. So when we talk about digital twin, and we talk about reuse of insights and all of that, is it one digital twin or multiple digital twins? How is it connected with the simulation aspects of it? So when we talk about simulation, it again depends on what kind of fidelity you want in your simulation, what kind of accuracy you want, what the purpose is, how would you verify it, how would you validate the results and all of that, what's the objective of the study. So your digital twin for a given purpose may not be just one digital twin, it could be multiple digital twins. And integrate that with OT and IT, all these applications that we mentioned. How do they help develop IoT? IoT does three things. Verify the identity of the system, check the status of the system, and control the system. So how does digital twin connect to that? And when we talk about integrating thousands of devices, the problem escalates a lot. There's a back-end system and there's a front-end system. On the front-end system, we have thousands of sensors that requires connectivity, okay? And embedded hardware, embedded software. On the back-end side, we have a lot of data, how to derive insights and the business value from that data. So that's the total spectrum bookends that we need to talk about in this here. So today, in this discussion, we'll have our first speaker to talk about simulation, is introducing Charles. He's a Director of Smart Cities and Special Projects in City of Orlando. Needs no introduction. He has been here, done that. Today he's going to talk about the City of Orlando approach to using affordable and emerging technologies on a continuous basis to make cities smarter. And his talk centers around use of ICT, communication infrastructure, communication technology, in overcoming some of these major challenges. With that, I yield the floor to Charles.
How do I change the slides?
Slide changer? There's a slide changer?
It's right on the little shelf right below.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's tough chatting after lunch when all our energies are really focused on digesting lunch. But I hope you stay with me. I hope you're all awake. Yes, so I am the Smart Cities Team Director at the City of Orlando. I've had a 3-decade-plus career after coming out of UCF at the City of Orlando. I was focused on transportation and public works. I was a project manager. Best part of my career was getting stuff done, practical stuff done. And so on my way out, I ventured into the smart city space more than anyone else at the City of Orlando did. And they asked me kindly if I would continue as a retiree, helping the city, pursue its smart city dream. So that's where I'm coming from. So, we've been talking about a lot of technology and a lot of things here, but, I'm a local government guy, and I want to zoom out and get focused. And I think sometimes we focus too much on the toys and the technology without being grounded, all right? So everybody wants to be a smart city and all that. It's not practical to want to be a smart city in 2 or 3 years. That's going to take you a good, 25, 30, 40 years. But you can look at your challenges and try to focus on being a smart city in those areas first while still maintaining the overall vision. So for us to have proper focus, we went to our executives, the people who the citizens elected. Try to find out, what are your citizens telling you and what's your vision, all right? And what we got back was what you see up there. And I fly like 2 or 3 times a month. So I deal with stewardesses, who really just repeat stuff to you right before you take off without really sometimes, taking care to make sure that they are enunciating well, that you're really understanding. So we have a lot of people at City of Orlando who know this by heart and can reel it off like citizens, but we want to make sure we dig into it and we take it apart and understand every one of these things. We want to be a great place to visit, live, work, play, raise a family, ensure good environmental stewardship, attract the creative class, and promote economic development. Not just going off by memory, but really diving into each of those components. And then we want to earn and retain the smart city branding, which is a continuing effort. It's not a one-time thing. It's not meant to be a fad. We want to pursue regional relationships because, after all, what good does it make if we try to be a smart city by ourselves in Orlando? What about our neighbors? Can't we achieve a whole lot more working together? And a very significant thing for City of Orlando is we want to leverage the achievements that local aerospace and defense contractors and our local research university, a big-time university, we want to leverage those achievements. So, what's a smart city? The U.S. DOT Secretary Fox, a few years ago, really energized the country with a discussion about smart city from a transportation perspective. But, we've been developing so much in this country, in universities and elsewhere, so many patents. Most of the patents in the world are developed right here. And people were taking all those things to Asia and Europe and developing stuff to be a smart city. And U.S. DOT Secretary Fox energized the country with a serious discussion around transportation, but it was a catalyst for discussions around everything, not just transportation. And so the Smart Cities Council that we were proud to be a winner of one of their awards last year, designated as a smart city in the making, one of 5 in the country. This is their definition. A smart city essentially is using the foundation of information communications technology, right? And doing it in 3 ways. We've got to collect the data, we've got to communicate it, and we've got to do these things that are, again, things that we need to pull apart. We need to crunch it, understand it, predict it, adjust, deploy, and advise our stakeholders. So the prediction part is a big part of what we're talking about today with simulation, emulation, virtual reality, a good term that was used earlier on. For us at the City of Orlando, again, this is not a technical talk. This is allowing us to bring some focus to the efforts of, smart city and, where are we going to apply, efforts and energies at simulation and so on to get the best benefit for our city early on. So these are the key things that are most important to us, stakeholder engagement. Everybody here is in a relationship of some kind, a marriage, a brother, sister, something. And that engagement with whoever you are in a relationship with is the key to your happiness and success in life. Okay? So for us, we have to understand who are our stakeholders. Are they our residents or businesses or visitors? Are they, our commissioners? Are they the people in neighboring communities? I'm a soccer fanatic, and I went to Europe for soccer, one of the biggest world tournaments a few years ago in Germany. And I realized right there and then that some of our biggest stakeholders, according to Disney and Universal, were really right. For the Orlando area, are people all across the globe, right? So we've got to engage them because they were doing Orlando news more than any other news in the U.S. And so that rang home for me. Public safety is a big deal. Some folks spoke about that this morning. I won't go into it too much. Safe and efficient mobility, a really big one for us. And that's where my professional strength lies. Special event and emergency management, a really huge one given our location in the state, right at the center of the peninsula. Surface water management and mitigation, we just heard the rain. Our geography dictates that we really have to manage this very well. We saw that last year. Right here, as we were doing this last year, we had to kind of break it up in the afternoon because we had a storm come through, and we really had some huge challenges with that last year and on an ongoing basis throughout this summer. So let me talk about this first one quickly. Safe and efficient mobility. We have the unfair designation of being the least safe metropolitan area in the country for pedestrians, right? We have UCF taking a step out front as a community partner trying to solve that with a driving simulator, looking at how pedestrians and vehicles interact, all right? And we are trying to then emulate UCF's initial step by doing other types of research and applications in this area. The compatibility of modes. Twinned with the first one, how do we get these increasing modes of travel with drivers from all across the planet coming through here? Driving habits in Orlando, just for context, last year we had about 70 million visitors to metropolitan Orlando. We have a population of about 2.5 million. You do the math at Christmas and Easter and so on, we have twice our regular population on our roads. All right? So we've got to make sure that all these modes of travel that people are using and all these, different driving habits all match up. We've got to get the most out of our transportation network. And, we've got to make sure that we're making expenditures as efficiently as possible. We've got to optimize intermodal travel so we know, can we reliably hop from one mode of travel to the other? Can we drive so far, hop on Sunrail or something else? And our economic competitiveness. Having efficient mobility for goods and services is very important to economic competitiveness. Most significantly, we've got to do something that we did not do when we developed the first in-vehicle navigation system in the world right here. We've got to build on it. When we do something, we've got to build on it. We've got to grow our tech ecosystem. For emergency management, I mentioned that special event and emergency management is a big thing for us. We're right in the middle of the peninsula. We're a great place for people to visit because of our weather and lots of other attractions. And we are using already and are building on some of the tools that are used to manage simultaneous events in single and multiple jurisdictions. Communicating, it's not just about transportation, significant logistics involved in this. Detouring for special events also and for incidents. And evacuation routing. So we have more hotel rooms in Orlando than anywhere else in the world. Vegas inches ahead of us sometimes, and we keep going back and forth. But because of that and because of our location, we are the prime location in this state for people to evacuate to. Bringing simulation tools to that is something that's very important for us. The public safety folks are doing that. The transportation folks are doing that. Doing it in different silos. We're starting to move towards each other and to blend these things. Surface water management, the last one that I will do, and then just make a couple other comments. Our sensitive environment and our geography both dictate that water quality and quantity be significant focus areas for us. They're not sexy things to focus on except when you have a flood or except when you have a fish kill or something like that. But those are not the times to be working on those things. Those things have to be worked on a regular basis. We've got to engage the public so they can see not just an engineer's printout of, some results of analysis, but they can see the results of some simulation, understand what impacts it might have to communities, what impacts it might have to the entire region, and so on. So we're doing this with help of partners like UCF in some instances on a macroscopic basis, and then down to the fine microscopic basis also for neighborhoods and lake basins. Already, we're seeing significant benefits of optimizing a property development way beyond where we were when we were just using computer programs to do these calculations and models. We're having safer communities as a result, an improved natural environment, and this is where it really counts for most of us here, lower incidence of property damage and lower insurance premiums. So that's my take on this whole topic of simulation, emulation, virtual reality, and so on. Bring it into focus. What are we trying to achieve before we get to the technology and the toys? And, what should our focus points be? For us, focusing on these areas and bringing new tools that folks like ISD, that David Metcalf talked about this morning, are allowing us to do, gets our neighbors, gets our community, gets our leaders to understand the actual impacts of visualizing what impacts might be from a lot of these challenges we have, allows us to have a better relationship with them, allows us to better sell the idea of getting public or public-private partnerships to fund a lot of these things, and allows the public to come, much feel, experience some of these things on a real-time basis. I think I took the 12 minutes I needed to take, and I'll answer some questions later on.
Yeah, later on.
Sure.
But just one quick question. Can you briefly describe any primary benefits you might have got from simulation?
Yes. So some of the simulation benefits that we have already received have helped us down in the tourist corridor here understand how to manage response for emergency vehicles. We did actually demonstrate such at the ITS World Congress, how we respond with emergency vehicles in very tight environments, in pedestrian-rich environments where people could be at risk, and gives us an idea of techniques to communicate with pedestrians of various abilities, people who are visually impaired and the like.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have some more questions later on.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So we saw a typical example in the application of simulation in the city area. Now let's move on to the next arena where we extend the simulation application and IoT together in some of the areas. So some major areas of challenges in industrial Internet of Things, as I mentioned, is connectivity, storage, data collections, and so on and so forth. So and connectivity is the most important problem, because if you don't connect, you're not going to get the data, and the whole thing goes haywire. So Industrial Internet Consortium framework, of which STAN is a member, it defines a new connectivity stack. It offers analysis of various standardization. And since this is an evolving field, no standards are beginning to emerge, but they have not been finalized yet. So this time I'd like to invite Stan, and in his talk, Stan will provide a glimpse of one of the connectivity standards called DDS and its applications. Stan is the CEO of Real-Time Innovation Technology, the largest industrial IoT connectivity vendor. And he's the recipient of 2018 Code IE Award for Best IoT Solution. He's also the vice chair of Industrial Internet Consortium, and he provides IoT solutions. He's the vice chair, serves on as advisory board of Industry IoT Solutions World Congress, and has been awarded Top Embedded Innovator Award for 2015. Stan holds a PhD from Stanford University in electrical and computer science. So with that, Stan.
Thank you. Where's my music? And Bill got music. Hi, everybody. I'm Stan Schneider. Company's called RTI. Who's heard of RTI as an acronym in this industry? So it stands for Restaurant Technology Incorporated. No. How about Ruby Tuesday Incorporated? Research Triangle Institute? No. There's a lot of RTIs in the world. We are a little bit different. I hope my talk will be a lot different or somewhat different from what you've heard today. And I'm going to start out by sort of following my predecessor a little bit, talking about safety, because my first experience with simulation was actually car crashes. And we didn't actually crash real cars, but we had tests like this where we ran things into walls, and we had a whole torture pit of pendulums and sleds and cannons and even pitching machines to throw things and beat on dummies. And my job was really to calibrate the dummies and try to correlate that with injuries that we saw in actual car crashes out there in the world. And I learned from that, simulating the real world is really hard. But simulating something that's not the real world is also not useful. We really need to have some way to tie together what's real and what's not real and make that work. So this isn't, computer simulation is very much a simulation. By the way, anybody here have kids that are between about 10 and 14? Because if you do, this is why they need a booster seat. That dummy is being restrained by its neck, not a good outcome. So. Anyhow, so I want to talk about industrial IoT. RTI is the largest middleware vendor of any type, actually, but certainly in this area, we've got out there in lots of real-world things across lots of different industries. I'll talk about the standard called DDS. It's really a different kind of way of connecting things. We're not a huge company, but in this industry, we're actually pretty big. We're the biggest of the vendors out here. We also spend a lot of time on consortia because we completely believe that you really need to, if the industry is going to survive and be interoperable and thrive in an area of connectivity, you really need to be able to work with others. And so we work with a lot of different markets in aerospace and avionics and ships and automobiles and process control and robotics and medical and power and on and on and on. And the largest of them all is the Industrial Internet Consortium. Bill, I don't see Bill here, but I really liked his first slide. It was one of our slides from the ISC. I'm actually the vice chair of the ISC. It's a big organization. It's the biggest in the industry. DDS as a technology, if you actually go and look at what the applications are, and I'm going to step through applications first here to give a feel for it, really has the function of taking intelligence, what I call functional artificial intelligence, and that doesn't necessarily mean deep learning, backpropagation, although a lot of times it does, but it really means taking something that's smarter than you ever tried to do before and connecting it much more deeply or broadly or capably than you've ever done it before. So I like to say that we live at the intersection of functional artificial intelligence and pervasive networking, and I'll give you a little bit of idea what I mean by that. So first of all, autonomous vehicles, one of our hottest markets. We're in 35 autonomous vehicle programs now, commercial autonomous vehicles. They aren't all passenger cars, so I can't really talk about a lot of them, but a lot of EV startups, software platforms you may have heard of like Ross, maybe not in the robotics world, and AutoSAR, but trucks and mining vehicles and Hyperloops, and we have two companies, one of them Airbus, I can talk about that, building flying taxi services, autonomous taxi services, autonomous ships, all these things. They sound like they're far out there. They're not all that far out there. I think autonomous vehicles will be on the market sooner than you might think. It won't be all the cars, but there's some pretty amazing technologies out there that are closer than you think to being deployed. We also are many, many defense systems. We sort of started out in that world. We'll talk about that in a second. Lots of research programs. So all of these systems and all of the systems we do sort of look like this on a diagram. We actually call our product a data bus. DDS is a standard that defines a data bus. For those of you who don't know what a data bus is, if what a database is, you sort of know, but a database is stored old information. A data bus is filtered future information. A database, you can go and get a slice of data. So I can find employees of Orange County that have been with the organization for more than 5 years and didn't join the 401k program, well, probably a 403b program, whatever. You can get a really accurate slice of exactly what information. That information is sort of a source of truth. A data bus is the same kind of thing, but for future information, and it's fast enough to do things like show me all pedestrians within 200 meters of me, or all objects within 200 meters of me moving 10 meters a second that might hit me. It can actually filter for things in the future and even filter fast enough to get feedback control and things like that. But essentially, you take the intelligence here, in this case called situation awareness and planning and localization and data fusion, and you put it together with the sensors and the actuators that make things work, like LiDARs and radars and the actual vehicle actuators, and you build a system. It's often layered, so you can go up to the cloud and connect into the cloud. It's really a very different kind of architecture. Some of the systems we work with are rather large. This is GE Healthcare's what they call the CCS division, Clinical Care System. GE Healthcare has 300 different types of devices. You go into a hospital, you've seen them. There are ventilators and respirators and ECG monitors and incubators and on and on and on. Today, these things are all completely, they're smart. They have computers in them, but they don't talk to each other at all. They don't even know they're connected to the same patient. And the problem with connecting them together isn't just connecting them together. You actually find the right patient and make sure you're tracking the right data. This is actually a simulation we ran in our lab of the network that they're building. Every one of those red dots is a room. They're designed for 10 to 20 devices per room. There's 300 dots on that screen. That's a very small hospital. It's actually designed for 1,200 dots and 200,000 devices. And the problem is there, we want to go in and we want to find Tom Baptiste, no offense, heart waveform, so that we can do an analytics in real time on that heart waveform and tell if he's going to have a problem in the next 5 minutes. That's the kind of information flow in real time that we're talking about here. By the way, Tom Baptiste, I have nothing against him at all. I love the NCS. In fact, the press release out today is joining our advisory board, so I'm excited about that. But I'm just going to pick on you because you're sitting there in the front. We also do some, really widely geographically distributed things like air traffic control for Canada. If you fly over Canada, you're under control of our software. So I can't be in Florida and not talk about KSC. We're actually running the launch control system for Orion. Anybody heard of Orion or KSC in the room? Oh my gosh. Anybody have a hand in the room? Let's see. I got about a 10% population that has a hand, so at least I know my thing. So anyhow, it's a big system. It really is real time. It's very safety critical. Lots of redundancy required, all that kind of things. We're also dealing with in-flight management and reentry tracking and recovery, all of them running DDS. So I'm giving you an idea what it does. Some things are very fast. This is a research class robotic surgery system. It's able to actually operate on a beating heart with a VR screen, so that the doctor or the physician actually sees a static surface and has a sufficient feedback control that he feels a static surface, even if you're cutting tissues. But in reality, it's still moving, and it's actually controlling the robotic arms and the sensors, and has a very accurate CT model, so it can execute things like that at 3 kilohertz. So, DDS can be very fast compared to many other things. It also runs some big things, as the Grand Coulee Dam. It's the largest power plant in North America. It really has to never stop because it's also the balance point for the Western grid. We have military applications. This is something called Blue Force Tracker. Anybody heard of Blue Force Tracker? So they did a great job sort of analyzing their legacy design, which was a different kind of middleware, and trying to do it with a data-centric design. A data-centric design is much more efficient. I'll talk about why. It's about 25 times more efficient. It also is redundant, standards-based, all those kind of things. Our very first customer was NASA's Interplanetary Rover program. We did lots of tests for, what they call disabled, intermittent, and lossy links. So this is actually a test we ran from the space station down to Earth. Obviously, in the real world, you do it the other way around, but it's sort of hard to do that for testing things. Lots of ground-air cooperative control we have some user interface, some high-end graphics, things like this. This is a ground station for unmanned air systems. RTI was actually the architecture lead for the U.S. Unmanned Air Program, so we have a lot of, for the ground segment, the U.S. Unmanned Air Program, we have a lot of experience with that, integrating high-end graphics, experience with actual simulation and other things. There's an Audi car doing hardware-in-the-loop simulation. They were trying to test and build how all the different ECUs and components of a car work together. They need to be able to simulate the vehicle so they can feed real sensing data and get actuator data out of the parts. So that's sort of our background here. We also are deployed in hundreds of programs across many services, essentially all the Navy ships, combat management systems. I think we're over in 100 sophisticated radars, unmanned air systems and tankers and all sorts of things like that. So just to give you an idea of the breadth of the industrial Internet of Things, these are actually just a few of the applications we're in out there. It's really an amazing array of different kinds of stuff. And what I'm trying to say here is we're relatively new to the simulation world, but I think there's a real opportunity to take this standard DDS and provide these kind of capabilities into simulation systems, which is sort of where we're going. How many are technical in the room? That's more than had hands. Okay. How many are not technical in the room? Okay, well, you guys can go to sleep for a little bit. First of all, what is DDS? DDS is a standard. It's actually a pretty well-known standard. There's 15 implementations we know of. RTI is one of the vendors. We're the largest of the vendors, but it's a very hot and sort of competitive market at the moment. It has a couple things different from other kinds of standards. The first that's different, it has both an API spec and a wire protocol spec, and that's so that if you write code to a DDS API, you can switch to a different vendor if you don't like it. And if I have two different devices or two different simulation components that are written and linked to different versions of the standard, different vendor versions of the standard, they'll work together. So that's sort of a unique thing. But the most unique thing is this whole concept of a data bus. So I said it's like a database. It's like a database that if you're working with a database, you work with the database. You have an interface only with that database. There may be many thousands of other entities or participants and talking to that database, but you don't care about that because your relationship with that database is sufficiently robust that you can get your work done without knowing what else is talking to the database. Data bus is the same thing. People like to put it in a box. It's message-centric. It is not. It sends no messages. It's client-server. There's no clients. There's no servers. Remote objects can be there, but we just sort of talk to them. It is publish-subscribe, but it also supports many other things like request reply and even queuing. And you can build services on it, but it's not a SOA. It's really something different. You have to put it in a box. I'll put it in the distributed shared memory box. It sort of fits there best. From an abstraction point of view, it's very simple. It makes all data look like it's everywhere all the time. And if you're technical, you probably know that's bull. But if I told you, hey, I can get everybody in this room, every newspaper and every magazine ever printed, as it comes, anytime you want it, right now, would you say I could do that? I can do that. I can actually provide every newspaper to everybody in the room. I don't think I can do that, right? Physical newspapers. But if I had said, okay, ahead of time, you're going to tell me what you want, and you're going to tell me what you want, and you're going to tell me what you want, and you want the Orlando Sentinel, or Sentinel? I don't know what it's called here. Weekdays at 6 o'clock, and you want the New York Times on Sundays, and you want Sports Illustrated. Well, I can figure out if I can deliver those, and then I can guarantee I'll always make them work. And it seems to you, if you ask for something, I can tell you if you get it, you're guaranteed delivery. That's like having all the data everywhere at the same time. It's very data-centric. It really is a pretty interesting thing. And if you actually look at how it works, and it's a mindset change, just like a database is a mindset change from files, it's really like a distributed shared memory, and it's completely naturally parallel. So we can... The real world, by the way, is quite parallel. Every one of you is running in parallel. If you drive a car down the road, all the things around are going in parallel. It's a much different way to look at things. Do I have time to do this? Maybe I'll skip through quickly how it works. I have this global data space. There's no servers. Another interesting thing. There's no place you have to decide where to put a server. It doesn't get flooded. It can't fail. There's no failover issue with servers, all those things. There aren't any servers. It does have quality service control, but how does that work? Well, there's automatic discovery. I can't explain how discovery works because it's just a special topic in DDS. It uses DDS. But here's our example here. You have an offer here. You got some sensor that can track obstacles. It defines what an obstacle is. It knows all the data fields of that obstacle, so it can look inside it. That's part of the data centricity. It's type aware. By offering to write that, it creates this thing in the virtual global data space. There's no real stored data space. It's a completely virtual concept. And then along comes somebody else says, I want to read it. Well, by the way, when you create it, you have to say things. I can write this 100 times a second. I got 1,000 buffers, so I'm reliable for 10 seconds. And I'm running out of time in less than 10 seconds. But another one comes along and says, I want to read it. I only want obstacles within 200 meters of me that are moving. I only want them 10 times a second. And we simply look at the two ends look at that, say, can I satisfy that request? Well, yes, I can if I send it every 10th one, only when they're close. If you think about this for a second, there may be 50,000 things in the vicinity, and I'm only going to send the few that get there, and I'm going to guarantee they're there in 100th of a second. I'll stream that at a well-known rate, and it also covers security. I will take one more second, and I'm over my time, to talk about security. There's lots of different ways to do security. Most of them don't match the architecture. People talk about bolted-on security. It gets hard to do. DDS, sort of like a database, has an integrated security that knows about the data flow. It's really a match to the architecture. There's no API for security. You sort of just turn it on and provide certificates, and it secures the communications. This is our architecture for simulation. You can have instructors, trainees, military equipment, all the things that we're hoping to connect it to actual equipment, we're hoping to connect it across services, all those kind of things, and I'm done. I ran out of time.
Thank you, Stan. Thank you very much. I learned a lot about DDS. I never knew that before. So I look forward to learning more about that. Thanks. Just a quick question. Can IoT be used for simulations?
Can what?
Can IoT be used for simulation?
So IoT is a term that isn't well defined. It's really the future of all technology, in my humble opinion. I mean, if you think about the internet, everything's online these days. Things, there are very few things that aren't things. Everything's a thing by definition. So sure, and a simulation is IoT.
All right.
But I think simulation can work together with the real world through the technologies that do IoT and build a much more high-fidelity simulation, and also have things like digital twins and even have real-time operations going on and affect those operations very much so.
Thanks, Stan. Appreciate it. So now, so far we covered simulation, IoT, connectivity aspects of it. Now let's move to a specific example of an industry, in power generation industry. So to talk about digitization specifically in power industry, we have Matt. Matt works in business development and strategy for digitalization at Siemens. He has greater than 10 years of experience in control systems, modeling, and thermodynamics. So his talk, we're going to focus on digital twin, but specifically thermodynamics digital twin, which is different than what we have seen so far. And he has worked in commissioning and thermodynamic design of commercial power plants. And current role, he's focusing on establishing Siemens as a leader in the field of digitalization in power industry. So with that, Matt.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. And I'd like to thank Stan also, because that answer leads in perfectly to what I'm talking about in power generation. And also what Fram talked about, he's another Siemens guy. What he was discussing was how we're using digital internally to streamline processes and manufacturing. So what I'm going to talk about today is digital in power generation, more focused on customer outcomes. So, and our customers in this space would be utilities, independent power producers, for example. So what can we provide to them to really improve their bottom line and improve their process safety? But before I get into the technical details, I'd like to talk a little bit about the industry and why it matters, right? Everyone talks digital twin, it's a big buzzword. And what does that really mean and who benefits? So starting from power generation specifically in the industry, why? What changes are we seeing that necessitate that? Right, so one big point is the integration of renewables. So I'm actually a local Orlando guy. I live in the Mills 50 area, and there we see, huge community solar as an example. So we're seeing from this McKinsey study, by 2030, about 87% of new generation will be renewable rather than fossil. Distributed generation, huge as well. So microgrids, very important for resiliency. We're seeing it a lot in the Northeast as an example. From Hurricane Sandy, of course, it's really important down here for our grid health as well. And then, interestingly, like I just mentioned with the community solar, more than half of consumers are exploring essentially self-generation, whether that means solar, whether it means diesel for larger communities. Very interesting topic as well. So what this means for the power industry really is a move away from the typical base-loaded plant, which means they just operate at 100% all the time. Now they're moving up and down. The equipment wasn't designed for that. So really, how can we use the information we have and that we've gathered and developed over decades to start making better decisions regarding how we operate the larger plants and how we facilitate the integration of the smaller plants as well? So something just to talk about as well, we're talking about all these benefits, right? What is the point of the digital twin? And what's this providing? So just bucketing it into some categories for power generation and really industry in general, right? Availability is huge. We did a little study recently, and we looked at an issue a plant had. They went down for 3 days. That was about $1 million in lost revenue from that one incident. So how can we use our analytics to better understand when things could possibly fail if we make certain operational decisions? What could those impacts really be? Performance, now in a typical Siemens style, performance here is talking about thermal performance. So how do we use the smallest amount of fuel possible to create those electrons? Risk management and compliance is really important. I'm sure you guys have probably already heard a lot about cybersecurity, which is really what fits in here. I won't really get into that today. Cost and operational excellence. So power generation is a really mature industry. So cost pressures are extremely intense, very competitive at this point. So how do we use what we're doing to make those decisions and be able to get the same amount of work done with fewer people, or same amount of people and work in a more efficient way, in a more efficient environment? So just a couple words on this. I'm honestly not really an IoT tech guy. I'm more of an engineer by trade, but just mentioning MindSphere here. So it's a platform we've developed. It's a cloud-based analytics platform that has specializations in time series data manipulation. Power generation specifically, it's a little different than other industrial processes in that the data is just hugely voluminous. There's time series data we're capturing down to the millisecond, that controls the plant, and that's very important. And also the power industry, of course, we don't want to all see power plants all the time, so they're typically built in remote locations. They're all over the place. We need to get that data back. And due to that huge volume of data and also the location of these plants, how do we crunch these numbers, get that data in one spot, and start delivering those results? So that's why we're moving to this cloud-based platform to get that done. And I always bring this up because it's not really about these applications, building apps, and that front-end kind of buzzwordy area. It's really more how does that enable the domain knowledge, the engineering expertise that we have and that our customers have, and be able to use that information in context of new digital tools and services that are going to really enable them to achieve those outcomes. And that's a little bit of what I'll be talking about today. So this is just a broad overview of what we're talking about, what we're building on top of MindSphere that's going to deliver these outcomes. So today we're going to take a deep dive into this performance. It is an important point to bring, right? We want to make sure we use all the data in context, when it makes sense, but also break this out into ways, in how people work, right? So thermodynamic experts are doing things in certain environments that maybe doesn't make sense for someone who's doing operations and maintenance, right? So we want to leverage that data, but we also want to be clear on, how to streamline this so that, we achieve what we want to achieve in the way that people actually work in real life. Okay, so getting a little more deeply technical here. This is our performance twin analytics capability. So on the left side, all these numbers are incredibly small. That's okay. You don't need to worry about it. But essentially what we're looking at is our design tool here. So we have a thermodynamic model software suite. That's how we design plants, and it gets down to incredible levels of accuracy where 0.01% is worth a lot of money in the commercial space here. So really taking what we understand about equipment, what it's going to do, based on certain boundary conditions such as weather conditions, also the kind of fuel you're putting in there, understanding how much power we can expect and what's that going to look like over the life of the plant. So converting that into something that moves through the life cycle process and isn't just used in the design space, but something we can use in context of the actual process data coming from the plant to understand where we're seeing performance deviations and how we can improve that. So over on the right side, we can see how we start breaking that down. So if we can take that thermal twin, compare it to that process data coming in a cloud environment, we can really quickly turn that around and say, okay, here you're losing heat in this process. You could be using less fuel if you made this operational change. So starting to use that information in that thermodynamic twin to drive longer-ranged operational decisions. It kind of changed the way we work to start streamlining these processes. And rather than writing all this out and having to do all these complex calculations and operator rounds with things written on notepads, we can now take that data straight back to an environment, compare it to what we know is the design basis of this, and then understand what we could do to improve those conditions. And this is actually an incredibly important point. This is really the economics piece. So, I talked in the beginning about all these different industry changes. And what that really means is we need to make different operational changes, but at the same time, take a look at what does that mean for the market. So, power plants essentially are taking fuel and turning it into electricity. Right? It's pretty simple. But in reality, in the marketplace, take California as an example, there's over 160 different financial instruments by which a power producer can get paid. So it's not just, hey, you can make 100 megawatts and, here's your money for that. It's, if there's voltage fluctuations, if there's frequency changes, all these sorts of different conditions. Storage is a good example. Capacity. how do we get paid for this? What does that mean? And how do we develop really a market twin that works in context of the operational decisions we're talking about to really get to the bottom line, right? So it's very cool talking about all the thermodynamics and the temperature distributions and CFD analysis and all this. But then how do we drive that down into operational decisions where we understand, okay, we actually don't want the best performance right now from the plant because it doesn't make financial sense for us, right? So that's the area we're trying to get to here. And this text came out incredibly small, so don't bother reading that. But essentially, how do we integrate this and how do we actually implement this, right? So at the bottom layer, in that darker blue at the bottom, really the simulation models is the backbone of everything we're doing. And then the digital application piece, so bringing this to a cloud environment, bringing this to a point where it's easy for people to use. I think that's a very important point of the whole digital twin. It's only adding value if it's something that's usable, by the people that are already doing this work, particularly in a mature industry. And then at the very top level, how do you streamline operations to really make sure that the advisory services that you're getting make sense in context of how you're working? If you're a huge outfit, are you making those decisions? Is that something you should be relying elsewhere on, right? And integrating that into customer diagnostics and really resulting in the energy market kind of fleet dispatch approach. How do we take all these decisions in context of an entire fleet that we're trying to operate? This is a use case. I'll just skip this one in interest of time, about 5 minutes, so I'll skip to this. This is a really cool technology. I like this a lot. So we talked about thermal twin just now in terms of the overall plant, overall design space, making certain operational decisions based on those thermodynamics and market conditions. This is something that integrates, it's essentially that same thermal twin concept, but integrating directly in a plant's operation to control it in real time and better control the thermodynamic cycle inside of a gas turbine in particular. Essentially, it looks like a jet engine on a plane for anyone who's not in that industry. Air goes in, fuel goes in, you blow it up, it comes flying out the back, and then power comes out of a generator, right? So how do we control that combustion? It's way too hot to actually measure, so we have to make a lot of guesses there. So this is on the combustion tuning side. There's two big pieces here. This how do we do this and make sure the equipment's safe and control our emissions? And how do we make sure that that temperature is as flat and stable as possible? So looking at that combustion tuning, initially everything was very manual and based on curves from engineering. And in the beginning, the emissions were really high. They didn't really have limits like they do now. So you could put the fuel in essentially just one tube and it just goes in. It's very easy to control. It is what it is. But as things got more advanced, now you put the fuel in a bunch of different nozzles going in very complex ways that you end up with a lot of different parameters. And this is where big data analytics really comes into play. So what we do is move all the way to the right side and take all these different simulations in context of the thermal model, look at all the different possible combinations you could have of the way you're putting the fuel into this engine to really optimize in real time. It'll make certain adjustments and say, okay, based on this AI simulation we've done, we've built up this learning model. In what optimal way should we put the fuel into this engine to make sure that we get, the optimal power and lowest emissions possible? And talking about firing temperature control, so essentially that temperature, that was one thing I was just talking about with combustion optimization. This is more on the actual temperature. We can't measure it, so essentially we look at the back end of the engine very far away and we say, okay, it's going to be about this if, way over here it's this other temperature. So what we're doing is we built up those capabilities to a certain point. And we said, okay, it essentially is what it is. Here we can make certain adjustments based on a bunch of technical factors having to do with how much air you're moving out of the engine and everything. But we went a step further, and in that same thermal model, it's essentially built into an industrial PC that sits within the control system. We went in there and said, okay, we're going to put the thermal model in here. We're going to essentially put a control volume around the engine, instrument everything up as much as possible. You got to solve for a couple unknowns, but then you can essentially say, based on that fuel going in, the air going in, and the air moving around, this is about exactly what that temperature would be. And we'll have a little use case I'll show you in a second where it shows moving from going up and down what the real temperature would essentially be to a much flatter line. So this is the auto-tuning piece. So this is talking about how do we use that big data analytics to control those frequency vibrations. So looking at the green, that's the combustion dynamics. If that goes over the yellow line, that's very bad. That'll cause like a major problem. So essentially what we could do, we turn this on right in the middle there. So it actually goes up a lot, but it's okay because now we fully understand that we're not going to exceed that yellow line. And the blue is the emissions. So we're seeing about a 10% emissions reduction from implementing that, which has huge environmental implications, actually. And this is one more I wanted to show from what I was talking about with that temperature control. So it's actually off in the middle here. The blue is on and then off right in the middle. So we can see how unstable it is in the middle, but then if you look at that red line and the yellow and green passing through it on either end, when you're comparing it to that thermodynamic model and adjusting for those errors in real time, you can much better control here. So it not only improves the efficiency of your operations, but it also improves the life cycle. Due to high cycle fatigue and these sorts of things, you can actually get a lot more life out of the engine, which is really helpful for the bottom line as well. So one final thing I'd like to end on, I know there was a lot of crazy technical stuff there, but just ending on this whole, start small, think big, and scale fast approach. A lot of the things I talked about here aren't, you don't just install them tomorrow and you're off and running. And some other things I didn't mention that are more on the operations and maintenance side. Huge implementation barriers, honestly. Because, a lot of what we're talking about with digital twin and everything is really 10% new technology and 90% culture change. So how are we interacting with data? How are we using this to our benefit? And how do we start somewhere we know we can see success, start scaling that, and then see a higher scale and bigger benefit in the future? So that's what I had. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Quick question. So you related thermodynamic.
Mm-hmm.
How does it help power generation industry? You went.
I went very straight to the bottom. Yes.
Okay. All right.
And how does it benefit? Really, what I talked about in context here is the big benefit is the thermal performance piece, essentially using a lower amount of fuel. I actually skipped over one of those use cases, but it showed about, I think it was 0.05% efficiency improvement. But that actually meant, I think, about $75,000 annually of savings. So even the smallest improvements mean, they're buying huge, huge quantities of fuel. So it's really that thermal performance improvement.
Thank you. So are there questions, folks from audience, Twitter? Okay, yep, there's a Twitter feed. So the question is, from our region's perspective, what is a main priority or opportunity that can be solved by incorporating IoT technology? So I guess, Stan?
So first of all, I think the region's perspective, Orlando is pretty clearly the simulation, what did you call it, the epicenter. It's not really something California, I like that name, but it's definitely the capital of the world in a lot of ways, and the ability to do simulation systems. I think IoT technologies can do a couple of things. First of all, they can make them easier to integrate with the real world system and make digital twins and all these other kind of benefits you see much easier to do. I think that in a lot of ways, the IoT, especially in connectivity and distributed systems, is a lot more experience with sort of tough problems, scale, wire interoperability, easy security. Without security doesn't require some special hardware. Like you can encrypt things in a switch, for instance, but then how do you add a wireless link to that? How do you deal with shared memory communications? It's much easier to secure data between applications rather than trying to secure the pieces, the hardware pieces that put that together. Deployment without servers, all these kinds of things make it much easier to build and have systems where parts can come and go at will. I think those kinds of technologies can bring a lot, and they really grew up in the IoT. IoT is sort of disrupting everything, so it's an interesting opportunity for the simulation market to get into more different kinds of markets.
Thank you. Any other question, please? There's one here. What low-hanging fruit opportunities exist for Orlando's simulation cluster regarding IoT and digital twin technology? Charles, you want to take a crack at that? It's specific to Orlando.
I'll take a part of it. So with the cost of sensors coming down so significantly, and with interconnected communications networks now throughout Central Florida, not just on the government side, but on some of the private side, non-telecom private communications, it allows us to really collect a whole lot more information that's very important to first archive and then use in simulation for meaningful purposes. Before, we had a hodgepodge of these things, and we could not really collect a lot of data reliably. And the sensor technology was not as developed as it is now. It was very expensive. Now it allows us to really collect data for transportation, especially. That's the lowest hanging fruit right now, and it's allowing us to share information regionally, DOT, counties, cities, and so on. Simulate different conditions. What is it going to be like on a typical Thursday workday afternoon at 3 o'clock, on Interstate 4 when it rains, when you have a certain rainfall intensity for a certain duration? What kind of travel options do I have to I-4 and so on? That's really, right now, the lowest hanging fruit for us regionally. There are some other things, of course, with applications in public safety and elsewhere, but I hope that answers your question.
Okay, I think it does. Thank you. Is there another one? With the emphasis on education and training, we have spoken about today, how is artificial intelligence affecting the future workforce?
Yeah.
Great question. So we had a little picture of Moore's Law up there, which showed that processor cores aren't increasing in speed, although maybe they will with quantum computing. But even if they don't, the density is still increasing to the point where it's really becoming more and more functional. Artificial intelligence is becoming much more available. If you actually take Moore's Law, if you assume it does last even in any reasonable form, and you extend it out 40 years from now, computers aren't going to be 10 times better or 100 times better or 1,000 times better. They're absolutely mind-boggling 100 million times better. So if you're sitting in this room, your children will not drive, your children will not write, your children will not compose music, your children will not make buying decisions, because there's already software and computing systems that challenge human capabilities in all of these areas, and they're going to be 100 million times better. And, it doesn't mean they at least they won't have to do any of those things. But that doesn't mean that there's no positions for people. If you went back 40 years ago, I think there's, you could never explain to somebody when I was in high school and never really even heard of a computer or a network, all those things, you couldn't explain to me what a back-end maintenance person does for LinkedIn or Facebook, right? There's no social media, there's no networking. So the things evolve over time. I tell my kids, you're going to be in this world. The thing you want to do most is, if you see change coming, don't be last. Be one of the first to change, not the last to change. And the AI technologies are going to make things much better. I started my career crashing cars. Back then, 45,000 people a year were dying on the freeways in the U.S. I thought, wow, it's a great opportunity to make a big difference. Last year, 40,000 died. And that's despite, anti-lock brakes and electronic stability control and multi-stage airbags and side impact control and anti-drug driving laws and anti-distraction laws and cell phone laws and the whole court system and all this kind of stuff. 94% of collisions are caused by the worst safety system in the car. It's called the driver. Autonomous cars aren't there yet, but autonomous cars version 1.0, when they hit the streets, will be a better driver than you are, and 2.0 will be a better driver than I am. And it really has an opportunity to take the carnage off our roads and, move it into simulation. So I think it's really an important thing to take a look at how AIs can make things better. We're going to live in a safer world. The medical system, the third leading cause of death in the United States is hospital errors. People don't know that. After heart disease and cancer, it's hospital errors. And artificial intelligence systems that can communicate between all these devices, the reason GE is building that whole thing is to cut down on the the level of those errors. We can make much more intelligent, distributed, intelligent energy systems that can incorporate wind and electricity, even though it's really dirty power. It's clean energy, but dirty power.
Exactly.
One of my favorite sayings. Back it up with some level of control systems that can stabilize that. There's just an immense number of opportunities. I would just say, if you're in engineering, take computer science. If you're computer science, take some engineering, and you'll be wonderful in any area of engineering.
Thank you, Stan. Appreciate it. And with that, Tom?
Sorry.
And panel members, we appreciate that. We're going to take a 15-minute break, come back for the final panel, and then we'll adjourn. Thank you.